Let's look on page 126. It says like this, 9b. For each law that God told Moses, he would enumerate 49 arguments for ruling that an object is ritually pure, and 49 arguments for ruling that the object is ritually impure. That's fascinating. That means that when God told it to Moses originally, God told Moshe, there's this item. He told him, I'll give you 49 reasons why this should be pure, and I'll give you 49 reasons why it should be impure. Moshe was actually bothered by that, and at the end, when we get to how we determine halacha, we're going to get to what God's response was. But firstly, we have to understand the fact that this was something that God intended. It wasn't like, unfortunately, arguments crept in later. Originally, when God gave the Torah, it came with multiple views. It came with the place for there to already exist the idea of arguments. We find this in another location. We find this, everyone here has heard, many of you have heard, of the famous sages, Shammai and Hillel. The yeshivas, known as Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, had a lot of arguments. If you read throughout the Mishnah, a lot of times that they had different arguments, that they disagreed on different matters. So there was one time that they had an argument for 3 years straight. Let's read together what happened. When they had this argument for a long time, they were debating what the halacha should be like. Text 9c, we're still on page 126. 9c says as follows. For 3 years, there was a dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. The former asserting the halacha is in agreement with our views, the latter contending the halacha is in agreement with our views. A heavenly voice declared, these and these are the words of the living God. A voice came out of heaven and said, both of you are saying godly views. You're saying that you're right, you're saying that you're right. Both of what you're saying is godly. What does that mean? If there's one halacha, if there's only one way of looking at it in truth, then how can they both be godly? How can you say that both of them have godly aspects in it? If we're giving over humans' views, it's not godly. And if it's godly, how can there be multiple views? But that's a fact. God says both of your views, both of the opinions that you guys have are both my intention. God intended originally for both of these views to exist. And now we have to understand why. It's a very, very interesting question. Once we understand that there can exist the concept, well, why would God want there to be multiple views? Why would God create the Torah in such a way that it should lead to arguments? As we said before, many people have been turned off by the arguments. Many people have said that the Torah can't be legitimate if there's so many different views. Is it just the views of the rabbis? We just said it's godly. So if it's godly, why would God create such a concept of argument? And it's a beautiful, beautiful idea that we're going to see over here. Text 10. Before we read it inside, I'm going to explain outside. It's a very, very important piece, and honestly very beautiful. He says as follows. I'll give you guys an example before we read it inside. Everyone here is familiar with an apple, right? Apples are healthy. We have a divine statement. You have an apple a day keeps the doctor away. It's very, very good for you. But, you know, you're not supposed to eat the seeds of the apple. If anybody knows why, there's a certain chemical in the seeds, a cyanide, and that's not healthy for you. But of course, there are good parts of the apple as well. There's vitamin A, vitamin C, all the other good things in there. So if I would ask you, is an apple good for you or bad for you? What would you answer me? Some people might say, it's good, has all the good vitamins. But somebody else might say, no, it's not good for you. If you look at it, there's cyanide in it. It's dangerous for you. Imagine the aliens come to show up on Earth. Yeah, very popular these days. Or somebody who's never seen an apple before. They study it in the lab for the first time. Scientists are discovering, is this something that we should allow people to eat or not? There might be some scientists who say, we should allow people to eat it. There's good vitamins in it. But there might be other people who say, no way. We can't let people eat this. There's cyanide. It could kill people. It's a terrible thing to eat. You should never touch an apple. Which one of them is saying something true? Is there vitamin A or is it cyanide? And the truth is that they're both right. They're both saying a true statement about the apple. The apple both has good vitamins, good things to it, and it also does have things which are harmful. Now, what do you do practically? Of course, you look at what the majority of the item is. You look at it, that it is mostly good. The cyanide is very, very minute. It won't damage you. So we can come to the conclusion that it's okay to eat it. But before that, if somebody would look at the apple, both values are true. And you cannot say either of them are wrong. You cannot say that the scientist who discovered the cyanide is saying something which is not true. And you cannot say that the person who noticed the vitamins is not true. Both values are true. Both values are correct. When it comes to what to do practically, we'll get to soon. This is the parable that we find over here as well. Everything that exists in the world is multifaceted. Everything in the world has different parts to it. There's good in everything in the world, and there's not good in everything in the world. So now, if God would only give you one view, If you would see an item and only see that this is pure, that would mean that you didn't properly understand this item. That would mean that you don't properly understand the halacha. Because Torah wants you to understand about every creation that is, on one hand, is pure, but there are impure parts of it. And the same is true with anything that's impure. If you find something which is impure, that doesn't mean that you can't touch it, that you can't go near it. There are good things to it as well. There are pure aspects to it as well. Now, obviously, the halacha at the end of the day might be that it's impure. But you need to have the other view so that you can appreciate that there's also good in it. There's also purity in it. And that's the proper balance that you need to have. For example, if you have a non-kosher animal, right? You're not allowed to eat camel meat. But you do need to appreciate that camels have something good. You can use it to ride. You can use it for other values other than eating it. So if the Torah were to say just that this is impure, of course that's a case where there are no other opinions. So obviously the good very, very much outweighs the other side of it. But we have to recognize that you can still use it to be able to ride on. And when you say that this animal is unfit to eat, that doesn't mean that it's impure, that you can't touch it. Everything in the world has both aspects. And you need to have debate. You need to have both views so that you can properly appreciate the multiple aspects of every creation. And that's why God wanted argument. God wanted different views on every subject so that you can properly understand the halacha. Not just see, oh, God said this is pure, it's pure, moving on. You should appreciate each and every item. You should recognize what it really is. And through that, you could probably understand the halacha. You could probably understand how we're supposed to interact with items in this world. Let's read it inside. Text 10, it's a little bit of a longer one, page 127, but it's a very, very powerful point. Let's read it together. Text 10. It is not possible for anything in this world to have just one aspect to it. Even if something is ritually impure, it must contain an aspect of ritual purity. And when something is ritually pure, it must have an aspect of ritual impurity. One feature of a particular case can elicit a verdict of innocence, and another feature a verdict of guilt. One facet of a particular item or action can indicate permitted, while another facet indicates prohibited. The same applies with regard to an item or action that is either valid or invalid. This is true in general for the world we inhabit, where objects are comprised of multiple elements. One can say about a tree that it's comprised of water, another can say it is comprised of oxygen, and both are speaking truth. When someone declares an item ritually pure and presents arguments to prove it, this person has demonstrated only one aspect of reality. Similarly, when one declares it ritually impure, it reflects only one aspect of reality. There is no doubt, however, that for the purpose of practical halacha, one aspect is more important than the other. Although God created things with multiple facets, one of them is more significant, and this is what determines the actual halacha. Still, do not say that the less significant aspects are wholly unimportant. This is not true. For when we hear all the opinions, we comprehend the item in its totality, with all of its features and components, as spelled out in the Torah. It is only with regard to the practical final ruling that one feature outweighs the others. So this is why there needs to be multiple views. This is why God created the Torah with the idea of different perspectives. So that when every item you encounter, you can see one aspect, but you should also recognize that there is good in it as well. And the same is true the other way around. Even if something is good, don't say this is the best thing in the world, and you can just, no, you have to recognize there might be something which is not good in it. And you need the different views so you can properly understand that. There's a good joke parable to bring out this idea. And you can have different perspectives on the same item. We spoke about it actually in the last course for those who joined us. The past course that we had was a very powerful course titled Paradigm Shift. We spoke of this parable, I'll give it again. Yeah, there was a large shoe manufacturer, Nike, sent two representatives to a new city. They wanted to decide if they should open up a new shop in town. So the two representatives come to town, they're discussing together, should we open a shop, should we not? And then they separated. And they were going to do their own research. After the first day of their own research, both of them report back to the company what they found. The first person who went, the first representative, sent back a memo to the company and said, I'm sending back all of my inventory. There's no point. Came to a city, nobody here wears shoes. There's no point in selling. Nobody's going to buy. I'm giving back everything I have. It's a useless market. I'm heading home. The second representative, who came to the same city, sent back the exact opposite report. He wrote back, please send all of the inventory you have. Send all the shoes that we produce. Because there's a city that I found that none of them wear shoes. There's so much opportunity. There's so much that can be done in this city to be able to sell shoes. Now, which one of them is right? they're both right. They're both saying something true. If you find a city that doesn't have shoes, you could say there's only people who don't wear shoes. There's no point in bringing shoes here. But on the other hand, you can say, no, that's not true. This is an opportunity. This is a case where there are so many people who could buy shoes. And if you recognize that aspect, then send over all the shoes you have. Because everything in this world has both values. And when you have that debate, when you have that argument, you can recognize both parts of it. Okay. This is also what we find in a beautiful parable. We know, anyone here plays music? When it comes to playing music, you play an instrument. The beauty of an instrument is only when there's differing sounds. When you have one musical note, which just repeats itself again and again, you know what it's called? It's called an alarm clock. Yeah, when my alarm clock rings, after 30 seconds of it, you want to break the machine. But how about when you have that same sound, but played with a certain pattern, a certain order, going up and down, the different musical notes? That's beautiful. That's something that's appreciated. I can listen to music for hours. My alarm clock, I can't listen to for 30 seconds. Because when it goes up and down, when there's dissenting, different types of sounds, that's the beauty of it. And this is a comparison to Torah as well. If there were to be only one view of the Torah, it wouldn't be so encapsulating. You wouldn't appreciate all the different aspects of it. It would be difficult to listen to for so long. As opposed to the Torah as we have it today, with the multiple views. When you tap in and you appreciate and you understand each of the views, now you get a full picture. And that's beautiful to listen to. Let's read that inside. This is written in a book called the Aruch HaShulchan. He explains very nicely this parable. Page 129. He says as follows. The Torah is called a melody. The beauty of a melody is when the sounds are different from each other. This is the primary pleasantness of song. One who swims in the sea of Talmud will find pleasure in each of its differing sounds. Right? As we put it up on the board over here. Harmony. When two different people are speaking at the same time, it's very difficult to hear. When you have a room with 5 people, all trying to talk to you, it's very hard to hear any of them. But as opposed to if they're singing together, if one of them is harmonizing, even if they're saying different words, together, it's beautiful to listen to. Torah is not a speech. Torah is music. And music is appreciated when there are different people speaking at the same time. Music is beautiful when the different views may be different, but going together in the same path. And that's the ultimate idea of Torah. And that's why God created the idea of argument. Okay, so now we concluded the idea of understanding why God created argument. But now, the question comes in. The question is, so if you have so many different views, you have so many different opinions, how do we know what to do practically? You have these values, you have these values, you have this truth is godly, and you have this truth which is godly. At the end of the day, you can only follow one of them. One of them must be the final halacha. How do you know what to do? So let's look back to that story that we mentioned from God talking to Moshe. When God gave Moses the Torah originally, God told Moses 49 views that it's pure, and 49 views that it's impure. Moshe was overwhelmed. Moshe asked God, how should we know what to do? Let's see God's answer together. Page 130, text 12. For each law that God told Moses, he would enumerate 49 arguments for ruling that an object was ritually pure, and 49 arguments for ruling that the object was ritually impure. Moses said before him, Moses turned to God. He said, Master of the universe, how will we be able to reach a practical conclusion? What do we do? God responded, follow the majority. If the majority rules it ritually impure, it is impure. If the majority rules it pure, it is pure. This is the rule that God gave Moses. Take a vote. If majority of the rabbis, the majority of those who are involved, who appreciate the perspective, say that it's pure, then they're saying the truth. And that's the halacha at the end of the day, whoever's the majority. And if the majority say it's impure, that's the majority, that's what we listen to. And therefore, when you have different arguments, you can properly understand the item. Once you properly understand the scenario, you properly understand the case, now you take a vote to see what to do practically. And when you see majority saying one way, that's God's intention. That's what that final halacha is going to be. And because of this, we find something fascinating. In the earlier generations of the Jewish people, we don't have recorded of many arguments, because there weren't so many arguments. In the times of the Holy Temple and times of the Beis HaMikdash, there existed this Sanhedrin, the High Court. When the High Court was there in Jerusalem, there wasn't so much arguing. Because if somebody had a question, they weren't sure what to do, they would go to the local rabbi, the local Beit Din, and the Beit Din in the city, if they knew the answer, would tell you. If not, you would go all the way up till you come to the high court, you ask them what to do, and they would come to a conclusion to be able to tell you what to do. They would take a vote and see the majority. So at the times of the Sanhedrin, there weren't so many arguments amongst the Jewish people, because there was a system. When you have a question, when you're not sure what to do, when there's an argument that could exist, you ask the court. Once you ask the court, that's a conclusion. You take the majority, end of story. Let's read it together. Text 13, from the words of the Rambam, back to Maimonides, page 131. The Rambam says as follows. As long as the Sanhedrin was in existence, there were no enduring halachic debates amongst Jewish people. A Jew who had a doubt about a particular law would inquire of the local Beit Din. If his judges knew the answer, they would tell him. If not, the questioner would go together with the Beit Din or its representatives to Jerusalem and ask the Beit Din that sat in the Temple Mount. If its judges knew the answer, they would tell him. If not, they would all go to the Beit Din that sat by the entrance of the temple courtyard. If its judges knew the answer, they would tell them. If not, they would all go to the chamber of hewn stone where the Sanhedrin convened. If the Sanhedrin knew the answer, because it had received tradition about it, or because it derived it, it would say so immediately. If the answer was not immediately clear to the Sanhedrin, its members would discuss it until everyone agreed, or they would put it to a vote, and the law would follow the majority. So that's the way things used to be. But, continues the Rambam, but once the Sanhedrin ceased to exist, divergent opinions proliferated. One sage would rule that an article is ritually impure, and support this ruling with a rationale, and another would rule that it is pure, and support this ruling with a rationale. One would rule an article is forbidden, and another that it is permitted. So that's the end of text 13, where we see from the Rambam that at the times of the high courts, there couldn't exist an argument. It might be temporarily until you clarify the matter. But you take a vote and you find out what the final conclusion is. The problem is only after there is no longer a high court. Once we don't have the high court, there's no way of just taking a vote. How do we know what to do? You might have arguments. There's no high court to turn to make a conclusion. So what happened was, and that's why we find at the times of the Mishnah, there are many, many arguments that started. Because there were debates, different rabbis said their opinions, and there was nobody really to be able to find the conclusion. And that was the case until the writing of the Talmud, until the writing of the Gemara. When the Gemara was written, when the Talmud was written, the two sages who compiled the Gemara, together with all those who helped them, all the rabbis who helped them, the main two names were Ravina and Rav Ashi. They went around to the sages of the time, and they asked for all the opinions, and they collected what the majority opinion was, and therefore the Talmud many times will say what the halacha is. They say what to do practically, because the Gemara, it was a time period where they compiled all of the final answers. They, so to say, took that vote to be able to see who the majority is, and they're able to rule who the final law is like. And even for things which were rabbinic, which we said needed to be accepted by the people, like we discussed last week at length. The rabbinic laws need to be accepted by the people. Well, all the people accepted the Talmud. Everyone accepts the Gemara. Nobody can argue with the Gemara. And therefore, since all the Jews accepted it, and they had the majority view in anything which it says is the halacha in the Gemara, so anything which is written in the Talmud, written in the Gemara, is fact, is halacha, and that is the final ruling. Let's see that together in the words of the Rambam, page 132, text 14. It is incumbent upon all Jews to follow all the rulings recorded in the Babylonian Talmud. Each city and each province must follow the customs endorsed by the Talmud and must enforce all rabbinic legislation mentioned therein. This is because the Jewish people agreed to all of those rulings, and because all the Jewish sages, or at least majority of them, issued those Decrean edicts, endorsed these customs, derived those new applications, and handed down these final halachic rulings. So we see over here is that once the Gemara was written, once the Talmud was written, all those arguments that existed previously were now clarified. There were no longer those arguments, because we now found who the majority was. We were able to come to know what the final halacha is. Okay, so that was very good while the Talmud was being written. And if you look today at the Gemara, you can find the halacha for many things. What about questions that came up after the Gemara? Now there might be this problem. There are three ways that you can still have debate today. Even after the Gemara is written, after the Talmud was around, there still might be questions. What could be the questions today? Number one, you might have a question of what the Gemara meant. The Talmud might say something, It's not clear. And you can have an argument about that today. Number two, you might have a question about a question which arose only later. There are many halachas about technology that might not have been addressed in the Gemara. Things that arose later. How do we know what the final halacha is on that? We don't have the multiple rabbis who were written in the Gemara to answer our question. About that, there could be debate today. And the third way there could be debate today is there are certain matters that the Talmud may have addressed, but it didn't come to a clear conclusion about. The Gemara says sometimes that we don't know, or just doesn't say the halacha. We might still have that question, and again, that's a matter which can be debated today. So a little bit after the Gemara was written, quite a bit after actually, there was a man whose name was Rabbi Yosef Karo, who compiled the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law. Shulchan Aruch literally means a set table. He set the table, he made it very clear for everybody. And you should be able to find the halacha, like a set table. You find your dishes easily. You could find the halacha, what it is practically. He compiled all of the views until his time, made a final analysis, and again, that has been accepted, just like we said about the Talmud, that it was accepted by everybody. And therefore, that's the final law. The same is true about the Shulchan Aruch, for the most part. Everything in there was accepted by the rabbis. Everything in there was agreed upon for the most part. And therefore, that became the final law. If it says something clearly in the code of Jewish law, then that's what we follow. You can't argue with what's written over there. So that one works for almost all questions that can exist. Almost everything is addressed in that code of Jewish law. But still, what happened to something that came up later, after the code of Jewish law was written? Or if it's not clear what the code of Jewish law meant? So there could still be a little bit of debate today. And in that case, you can go to your rabbi. And your rabbi will tell you, because a lot of books have been written even after the code of Jewish law was written. They may not be accepted by everybody, but there may be the custom which is followed. There may be the opinion which is followed. But again, those are only going to be minute matters. Almost everything has already been addressed. So if there's a question that arises today, it might be something very, very rabbinic, doesn't really hold so much weight if you follow like this view or like that view. If there's an argument today, you follow either of the opinions, you're probably doing all right. So when we say that there's an argument today, it's usually not on very, very important matters because almost everything has already been addressed. And when there is an argument today, you can go to your local rabbi and he'll tell you what the custom, what's accepted amongst the Jewish community is, so you know what the majority view is, and you know how to follow practically. So now we understand again, we finished explaining why argument exists. We finished explaining why God wanted it that way. We finished explaining how it's also godly even when that happens. And we finished explaining now that once there is that argument, how do we know what to do practically? So now we're going to come to one final message that we can learn from the idea of argument, and with this we'll conclude. And that is, there's a beautiful value when it comes to having an argument followed by the final halacha. Let me ask you a question. If you have someone living at home, unmarried, living alone, is that called a peaceful house? Can you say that there's shalom bayit over there? Not really. The house is not peaceful, it's lonely. That man is alone. Peace is not when there's nobody to argue with. Peace is when there's multiple people who are getting along well. Peace doesn't exist when there's nobody else there. You can only really call it peace when there are many people that argue but get along together. That they may be opposites, but they really work well together. And with this we can understand a very, very puzzling question, puzzling statement. We all know, like we said before, the Gemara, the Talmud, the Mishnah is full of arguments, full of debates. So if you would expect what would be the final line of the Mishnah, of the Talmud, it might be something about the power of debate, the beauty of it. But let's see what the final lines of the Mishnah is. Let's read the closing words of the Talmud. In our books, page 133, text 15, the Talmud finishes off with this message. It says like this: God found no better vessel than peace to hold blessing to the Jewish people. For it says, the Lord shall grant strength to his people, the Lord shall bless his people with peace. You see the idea that God specifically wants peace. God wants peace, and that's the best vessel. Now, seemingly this is puzzling. The Talmud, which is so full of debate, so full of arguments, you might expect that it finishes off about arguments. How does it finish off about peace? And the answer is like we started to explain before. True peace requires opposites that learn to coexist and love each other. If there's only one view, if there's only one opinion there, it's not called peaceful. It's called lonely. It's called the way it is. It's not called peace. Peace is when there's different people, right? A marriage is between a man and a woman. A man and a woman are opposites, yet they come together, and that's called a peaceful home. When two people who naturally should disagree with each other come to be one, That's called peaceful. And this is the way it was in the times of the Gemara being written. That there may be a sage saying one way, and another sage saying another way. But when the final halacha is given, when the verdict is made, they come to agree. The members of the minority would join the majority. And that was true peace. True peace is when both views can listen to each other out. And this is the way it is in the yeshiva. If you walk into a yeshiva today, you may hear two best friends sitting together and learning. And one might say, I think that the Gemara means like this. And his friend will say, no, I think the Gemara means like that. And he'll say, what are you saying? You don't understand the Gemara. And this one will say, you don't know how to read. You don't know what you're talking about. They may get into a serious discussion, serious argument about what the Talmud's intention is. But at the end, they're going to walk out at the end of the day of learning. They're going to say, okay, lunch break. They're going to be best friends. And in truth, they may even, during the time of learning, turn to each other and say, oh, I understand what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. Because in truth, the idea of argument is not the end game. The end is that you should come to recognize the real answer. That you should come to recognize what's truly true through the argument. And that's the beauty that we find. That's the beauty in the peace of the Talmud, where there were two opinions. They may have looked very, very different, but at the end of the day, they're going to agree. At the end of the day, they're going to come to the same conclusion because they're both looking to understand God's idea. And with this, we're going to conclude today's lesson. We're going to watch a video now, which will sum it all up. There's also going to be the link at the end of the video for those who want to watch the video themselves. Let's see this together. The summary can be found in your books on page 134, the key points from today's lesson.
Lesson 4, key points. 1. There are no rabbinic debates regarding the received oral Torah, but it is common for debates to appear in the derived, legislative, and customary categories of Torah. 2. At times, God embedded in the Torah multiple clues leading to varying outcomes. The resultant dissenting opinions are therefore both the words of the living God. 3. Both conflicting opinions reflect a divine perspective regarding the case under discussion, and it is only through hearing all perspectives that we learn about the object or case in its entirety. 4. The final halacha was determined by the majority of the Sanhedrin. 5. The Talmud's rulings are binding for all Jews, inasmuch as the majority of Jewish sages of its day ratified its decisions. 6. Rabbinic debates are a paradigm of peaceful relations. Peace requires divergent viewpoints that then peacefully resolve. When the Sanhedrin was operational, a legal dispute ideally ended with the minority agreeing with the majority ruling. Next week, are there areas of Jewish law that can use change or appeal? If yes, who has the authority to amend or revoke? A heavenly voice? A prophet? A sage? Is modifying rabbinic enactments a simple process? After all, what human beings create, it should be able to abrogate. When we meet next time, we will consider these important questions.
So again, I hope you can all join us here, God willing, next week, Monday night, 7:45 for dinner, 8 o'clock for the lesson. Again, a big, big thank you to the Howard family, to Scott and Alan. May they have lots of health, only blessings, only reveal good, and may their mothers neshama have an aliyah. Esther Elka, Bas Aaron, should bring down tremendous blessings for them. Should only have the best of a sense for herself, and we should only celebrate good times together, lots of blessings. Their sponsorship allows us to be able to do all of these amazing classes that we've been giving, and we're wishing them lots of blessings, and as well, may all of you have an amazing week, and God willing, we will see you same time, same place, right over here next week. Wishing you all the very best, and thank you for joining us tonight.